Okay, so we'll get going. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this evening. We hope that you are feeling comfortable in your chair, that you've grabbed a drink, and that you've had something to eat. If there's anything left over, of course, it'll still continue afterwards. The event doesn't stop at the end of this panel discussion. There's going to be a live band starting at about 8 o'clock. Please stick around. Please get another drink or two. Hang out on the balcony. It is First Thursdays. And so we really want you to not only have discussions not only have fun on a night like this in Cape Town, but to also have discussions that really shape the way that our country works. So the way this evening will work is myself, John, and Temba will be having a bit of a free-flowing, easy conversation. We may draw you in at some time, and then at the end there'll be Q&A. So please feel free to just make notes of those on your cell phones, questions, or we'll just have a bit of a free-flowing discussion afterwards. Tonight is hosted by Progress South Africa and by FNF, or the Frederick Naumann Foundation. Progress South Africa started towards the beginning of last year, I think in about February, and we essentially birthed out of the fact that after the Roads Must Fall and Feeds Must Fall movements on campus, essentially what is a large wave of protests that happened across the country, calling for decolonization of our academics and our institutions, but also calling for lower fees for students. We felt that there was a vacuum in which we could step away from rhetoric and really move towards calm, simple, rational arguments and conversation. So besides just loud words, we actually have substantial ideas behind them. And so Progress was birthed out of that. Really what we're trying to ensure is that as we, the crowd, get older, because our guests this evening are shaping the country for us, we need to make sure that we in fact inherit a country which is free and which individuals can pursue all that they want to pursue. So our slogan is Our Freedom, Our Future. Frederick Naumann Foundation is an NGO initially based in Germany, and they really support a lot of causes like ours, which wants more young people to engage with what are good and truthful ideas for a country or for a people. Yeah? John Steenhuisen, he's the leader of the opposition in our national parliament. He's also the interim leader of the DA. As many of you will know, the DA is at the moment heading towards a congress. One of our leaders resigned not too long ago, and so what we need to in the meantime, to ensure that the DA continues to be stable and can fulfill its role as being the opposition and holding the executive and the party to, the ANC to account, the governing party, we need to have ourselves an interim leader. A wonderful thing about both John and Temba is that they both started in politics when they were incredibly young. Early 20s for John, 22, I believe, and Temba asked me earlier to do some maths, but I didn't do the maths. So I'm going to assume in his 20s as well. John started as a city councillor in Durban, got involved as an ordinary member, and moved from there into provincial legislature of KZN, and from there moved on to be a member of National Parliament, then Chief Whip, and now interim leader. The thing I want to really pull out of John's story, and his short bio for you guys, is the fact that he started as an ordinary member, and that he's now held positions as you go through the rank, and he hasn't just come in and, as like young people like to do, we want to be millionaires by the time we're 21, come in and parachute to the top. He really did the hard yards as he went through. So John, welcome.
Thank you very, very much. Great to be with you. Thank you.
And then with Temba Nolutshungu, Temba is the chairman of the Free Market Foundation. Director, forgive me. Director of the Free Market Foundation.
One of 4 directors.
Yeah, 4 directors. So director number 1, number 4, teasing. Temba has, again, same thing, an illustrious career in politics. Started out as one of the pioneering activists of the Black Consciousness Movement. That was back in 1969, I believe.
Steve Biko was my contemporary.
Steve Biko was your contemporary. And since then has gone on to write many books, criticizing both NGOs and civil societies and political parties, and making sure that as a think tank and as a man involved in business and civil society, that we continue along a line which really serves the individual person of our country. At the moment, he holds positions in the Langa Foundation, is that correct? Langa Heritage Foundation, the V&A Waterfront, and quite a number of others.
Non-executive director.
Okay, I obviously haven't done my homework correctly. I apologize.
Well, I can't expect you to have all these details correct.
Thank you.
So that's understandable. You're human.
I appreciate that. But once again, we have a story of a man who started out fighting against the apartheid system, ensuring that today we have a future or a freedom which we, in fact, can walk around freely, pursue jobs, and everyone in South Africa is really equal and free. He's still involved, still tries to add his voice to society so that we, as individuals, in our future, will have freedom as well. So, Temba, thank you very much. Okay, so the theme for this evening is State of the Nation Address. Next week, I think it is Wednesday or Thursday?
Thursday.
Next week, Thursday, President Cyril Ramaphosa will be giving his State of the Nation address at National Parliament, right? Usually that is characterized by a speech which reflects on the state of the country, sound, and which looks to some kind of vision or plan for the future, which says how it will solve the problems. A lot of the time, it's quite boring. A lot of the time, people only watch it for the arrivals on the red carpet, a few photos, and then we switch the TV off. What we want to do here is to have a critical discussion about the real State of the Nation address. We know that the DA has been campaigning across the country, talking about the real state of the nation, and so we'll really be able to delve into that kind of conversation. I think a good segue into that, John, perhaps we can start with you, is to talk about Richard Quest's interview in Davos that was on YouTube and trending on social media, which really spoke about South Africa being a failed country. And where's the accountability? And you know, even though we might see all of this talk of SAA being put under administration, you know, but really, is it the kind of bold moves that we need to see to be able to fix South Africa?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that anybody watching the Richard Quest YouTube clip was going like, yeah, I mean, this is really great, you know, being pinned on something for eventually, because I think it is one of the problems we have in South Africa. You know, I say the problem is not only political, ANC, but one of the key underpinnings of the problem is that there's absolutely no consequences. So I've been very lucky to have been out and about over the course of the last 2 weeks on what I've called the real State of the Nation tour, visiting places that have frankly been forgotten by governments and left behind, where South Africans are living in really, really terrible conditions and are losing hope that there is a chance for them for the future. And in visiting places like that and seeing these circumstances, it really brings home what the real state of the nation is. And it is very, very far removed from the things we hear about bullet trains and, you know, new cities, etc. We've got cities and infrastructure around the country that's completely failing and has left people far behind, without even the most basic things like drinking water, electricity in their homes, things we take for granted, that you switch a lighter, switch a switch on and there's lights, then you turn a tap and there's water. Lots of people having to still walk kilometers to be able to just access basic services. And so there's something very, very wrong. And underlying all of this are municipal councils and legislatures that have frankly left people behind as well, because these are the very people who should be getting up every day and fighting for a better community. Instead, they're either fighting each other or they are fighting for a share of the spoils. And there is no accountability. So in all these municipalities, you can go back, they get a disclaimer from the Auditor General every year, the fruitless and wasteful expenditure balloons every year, but there are no consequences. The same people continue in office, doing the same thing year in and year out. So these things become a one day of bad headlines, and it's back to the looting the day afterwards. And they're simply sucking these municipalities dry. So you're going to hear a lot about the president, because it's his new watchword. He stole it from from Auntie Helen a few weeks back about the capable state. And no doubt it's going to be the centerpiece of his State of the Nation thrust, building the capable state. But the thing is, you can't build a capable state when you have incapable local government out there that's unable to provide even the most basic semblance of basic services and that. So, you can talk about the capable state as much as you like. Unless you're able to deliver it where the rubber hits the road, where people access those services, you can forget about building it at a national level. It's never, ever going to happen. So the country is in a very, very difficult space. And as I'm going to argue in a piece released later this week, I do a newsletter weekly. It's called Straight Talk, where we talk straight about the issues facing the country. We're going to make the point. We're 5 minutes to midnight. The country is nearing the precipice. And unless we have bold reforms and bold interventions from the President grasping the opportunity to stand up to his opponents and the enemies of growth in his own party, I fear the State of the Nation address is going to be more of the same. 30 years ago, de Klerk made a groundbreaking speech. And I like him or loathe him, and history will pass final judgment on him. That was a cataclysmic speech that changed the way South Africa was to be. South Africa, the day after, was a completely different country. We need to see the same boldness from President Ramaphosa in this State of the Nation address. Timid moves, vacillation, kicking the can down the road isn't going to cut it. He's had the slack now for the last two. This needs to be the one where he sets out his clear vision about what he wants to achieve, but then sets out very clearly what he's going to do to achieve it.
I think you've done two really interesting things there. One, you've shown us how what's happening in politics and what's happening with President Ramaphosa is affecting the ordinary person on the ground across the country, and perhaps your tour of that really helped you to understand that properly. The other thing is that you've begun to introduce the idea of what can we expect President Ramaphosa to say? And Temba, I want to pull you in here, because what's interesting is that when Ramaphosa came in 2017, or towards the end of 2017, we saw a doubling of our foreign direct investment from about $2.4, $2.6 billion to $5 billion in 2018, and in 2019 it kind of plateaued out, right? And his whole idea around New Dawn was to attract $100 billion of foreign direct investment into the country, and for that to drive growth, drive jobs, and that was his one big promise, or one of them at least. Given what Richard Quest has said, and given the fact that we've seen FDI plateauing, right, what do you think we can expect from the President to say next week, Thursday?
Now, first of all, I have two confessions to make. One confession is the last Sona speech that I heard, that I listened to, and read about was by President Mandela.
Case in point.
And after that, I said to myself, there's no point in me listening to any of his successors. But I did listen halfway to make his Sona speech. But then, after that, that was the end of the story. For me, I do not attach any significance to any Sona speeches whatsoever. They are designed to appeal to everybody's sentiments. They give you that feel-good sort of sentiment, oh, everything is good and so on. But if you try to distill them into actual concrete policy measures, there's nothing. They are so seriously lacking. And so I'm sorry, I'm going to disappoint you on that.
Yeah.
However, let me just bring in something here, because there's a whole comprehensive range of issues that you said should be addressed. I might not be able to do justice to them, but there are also others that you've left out of that, that description in terms of our delivery that I'm going to bring in.
Please,
one of them
please.
is affirmative action, which is broad-based Black economic empowerment. That I don't like that euphemistic acronym, because it's like there's something good here that's going to happen and so on. I am very critical of affirmative action because I've learned lessons from other countries. I have empirical evidence that attests to the fact that the beneficiaries the intended beneficiaries do not actually derive any benefits. Affirmative action has got nothing to do do in the context of South Africa with people in Pontyville, in Langa, Soweto. It's got everything to do with the political elites, those people who are close to government, who are well connected. That is the story of affirmative action. I'll dwell on that later on, hopefully, because that beast must be slain. That dragon must be slain. Now, Reverend Edward Hale, a US columnist, was asked a question. Do you ever pray for senators? This is in the US. He said, no, I don't. I look at the senators, then I pray for the country. Now, the lesson to be derived from this in the South African context is, let us not look up to government to fix things. What we can do is to prevail on government to consider implementing the right policies that account for socio-economic delivery in other countries. One country that comes to mind that I've studied very, 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 very well is that of China. China, as you know, politically is a communist country, but there was Deng Xiaoping at the helm of the Communist Party. When he saw what was happening in the capitalist-oriented countries, he decided that was going to inform the policy measures that were going to be implemented in China. That started with the dismantling of the agricultural sector in China. That was around early 70s, I think 71, 72. And he started opening up the economy. And one of the important things that Deng Xiaoping said was that, to quote him, it is glorious to be rich. This is a communist. This is a communist. With communists like this, who needs capitalists? This was Deng Xiaoping. And so China embarked on the most radical free market-oriented reforms, historically speaking. That started out in Shenzhen province, in Shenzhen state, a small town it was. Now it's grown up into a big city. And then the experiment was rolled out to the rest of the Shenzhen province, the province, and then slowly it is being rolled out throughout China. And that is what accounts for the fact that China is now the second biggest economy in the world. Free market-oriented principles inform the policies that were implemented in the designated free zones, special economic zones. That's what happened. Now, can you imagine if the whole of China were to open up on the basis of those reforms? It would just overtake the United States like this. Just like that, and the United States would not know what happened. The United States of America, of course, that's what I'm talking about. Now, the point is, there is a lesson to be learned from this. Because from the early 70s, 1972, to the present, as recorded by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, these policies account for the fact that more than 500 million Chinese have uplifted themselves from poverty. Not by government, but government policies. They uplifted themselves from poverty. That's amazing. It's difficult to comprehend that within about 3 decades, you have a situation where this country had imploded economically during Mao Zedong's communist regime. And now it was turned around and it's become this big economy, the second biggest economy in the world. So there is a lesson to be learned from that. But I know that politicians will not listen to that, because politicians are afflicted with this disease that's known as the fatal conceit. That fatal conceit means that the politicians are not receptive, will not listen to evidence, to empirical evidence, because somehow we, the politicians, we in government, we, the ruling party, this has got nothing to do with criticizing the ANC, we, the ruling party, we know best what should be done in the economic arena. And so we'll generate the rules of the game, will come up with all the policies, and alas, the policies that they've been implementing negate our socio-economic aspiration in this country. And which is why, for example, if you look at the national minimum wage that is soon to befall us, that is slowly being implemented, and the threat of that, the national minimum wage, first of all, negates the employment of the people who don't have skills, the people who don't have experience, work experience that is, and these people tend to be young. And some companies might not be able to measure up in terms of remuneration at the mandated level in terms of the national minimum wage. And so what's going to happen? So what's going to happen is these young, unskilled, inexperienced people will be the first to be retrenched and the last to be hired, if they are to be hired at all. Maybe at this point I should pause a little. Otherwise, I could go on the whole day. I'm sorry about that.
I do think...
I remember I said I had two confessions
No,
to make.
no, please, feel free. I said free-flowing.
I had two confessions to make. The second one is that I am neither politically correct nor politically incorrect, but politically incorrigible.
Right,
So
wonderful.
do not feel inhibited when you comment on what I have said, on what I will still say. Please do not. I consider myself one of the most liberated individuals in this country, and I really feel good about that. So don't feel inhibited. Sorry.
No problem, don't say sorry, thank you. You brought up two really interesting points, which I'm going to turn to John at risk of maybe it being a bit too difficult, not complex, dangerous question to ask, perhaps, and we'll see in a moment. And my next point was about corruption and SAA and whatever, but we can put that aside. You brought out empty rhetoric, right? The fact that you don't watch the State of the Nation address because really you're just listening to things which sound nice but got no substance behind it. And you brought out substance behind policy, right? That in China really drove reform, okay? And that is the real important thing, which is what changes people's lives, okay? So I want to pull those two things out of there, and I want to turn to John and say, one of the huge benefits, and I was having a discussion with Wayne earlier this afternoon about this, one of the benefits that I think socialism or social ideas have is that it can often come across as being more empathetic towards the people's problems, because they'll say things like affirmative action, and it sounds affirmative and action, or something like black economic empowerment. I said the same thing twice. It'll say something like black economic empowerment will, really at face value sound like it's addressing the injustices of apartheid, right? Or race-based policy or ideas like that. And so it's easier and quicker, I think, for the voter or for the citizen to agree with that kind of idea because it addresses the feeling of injustice. But if you look at the structure of black economic empowerment or affirmative action or the NHI, or I watched one of the Free Market Foundation's videos about NHI and it's a disaster waiting to happen, or any of those socialist ideas which sound nice but in structure have no substance, right? To an organization which is trying to get people to take more ownership of themselves and trying to have a government structure which allows that individual to pursue their ideas freely, right? How do we, as young liberals or young people who are considering this idea of the freedom of the individual, right, behave in a way which is empathetic, which sounds and addresses the feeling of injustice while having ideas which have substance behind them?
Yeah, sure. And I think that you make a very, very good point. But I think that you've got to look at those policies and what's on offer and see what the real intent is behind them. So they come up with these fancy names, and you've heard Temba talk about broad-based black economic empowerment, which has neither been broad-based or economically empowering, except for about 974,000 individuals in South Africa who have become a new elite. And those names are meant to be the lipstick on the pig. They're meant to make it look a little bit better and sound a bit better. And if you're against that, then you must be a hard ass or laissez-faire, pull yourself up by your bootstraps person and leave people to get on with their own lives. But I think there's a common thread to all of these policies which should alarm us, and not enough political analysts are pulling the threads together, because what the ANC want is precisely the opposite to what China in Shengen province wanted. They want a nation of serfs who are subservient and completely reliant on the state for their very existence. The state wants to absorb and take away all agency from young people, working people, families, and absorb that up into the state. And if you look at the policy suite that's coming out, it is all a fundamental frontward assault on individual freedom in South Africa. So let's look at the NHI. There can be no more individual personal choice about how you access medical care, how your family accesses medical care, where you can go and see a doctor, the day you see a doctor, and the type of, and which doctor you want to see. And now the state's looking to take that choice away from you and prescribe it. There can be no more personal choice about how you plan for your retirement and where your funds are invested to be able to plan and ensure you're all right in your retirement. And yet the government now wants to take your retirement savings that you've worked hard for as an individual and pump them into failing state-owned entities. And you can look at all this. Expropriation without compensation. It's got nothing to do with genuinely empowering people with land. If that was the government's actual primary purpose, then you've got to ask yourself why 95% of the farms and land that government has acquired through the land reform process remain in the name of the state. They've never been handed over to the beneficiaries. And why people like Mr. David Richatse have got to come to parties like the DA to fight for government just to do what they'd committed to doing. They don't want people to own land in South Africa, because when people own land and they have title, they get agency, and that agency leads them to improve their lives and to climb the ladder of opportunity, and then they can think for themselves, and they're not subservient to a government, and then they can see that this is a government that's not serving them. There can be no more personal choice about whether you own a firearm to defend and protect your family in a country where we have a massive crime rate and the police seem unable to deal with it. And yet government wants to take away the ability of a citizen to own a firearm for private defense. And you can look at the entire policy suite of the ANC. You can look at the NDR, the whole policy suite there. It is all designed to erode individual freedom and to place the state at the center of everything. And so what we need to do, not only as young liberals, but as liberals around the whole country, is to be standing up, is to be joining the dots to see that these individual policies have got a common purpose and a common intent, and to resist that with all we can, and use every lever if possible to expand individual freedom in South Africa and reduce the role of the state. Now that's not to say that there's no role for the state. I think I'm not a sort of unbridled, no controls, no regulation. I think the state has a role to play, but that role is not in running an airline. It's not in running an arms company. It's not in being a provider and generator and sole supplier and monopoly on electricity in South Africa, because it does all these things and does them very badly. And one of the reasons we're sitting without lights and without water in many of these municipalities, with an airline that doesn't fly. They announced today that they're no longer going to fly to places like Durban and backwaters like Johannesburg and Cape Town. They're not going to do that anymore. I mean, you've lost your whole purpose. That's, why does Safair make a profit? No subsidy from government. Why does Comair make a profit? No subsidy from government. Yet the most heavily subsidized, bailed out airline in the country cannot turn a profit. It's because government runs things badly, and we need to get them out of, and we need to shut government down in those businesses. And that means all of us have got to be active citizens and on the front lines of this fight, resisting government's creeping authoritarianism and crowding out of individual rights. And they make you feel bad. So they say, if you're against expropriation without compensation, you don't want black people to own land in South Africa. I say to them, I don't want expropriation without compensation precisely because I want black people to own land in this country. And we can do it through a proper land reform process, cutting out elite capture, cutting out the state trying to get its hands on every piece of land possible so it can reduce people to serfdom in the country. So many of these policies that they try and tout as being progressive and forward-thinking and all these words that the left uses are actually designed to lull you into a sense of complacency. We mustn't be lulled into complacency. We must rage against these policies and fight hard to make sure that they don't ever come to pass.
Gosh, I was always moved to tears there for a moment because in 2013 I tried to start a campaign on campus which was around getting UCT students to realize what it means to be an active citizen and how you use what you either enjoy or what you are studying towards to actually build the nation. So to hear you call us to active citizenry is like, you might as well get on your knee and ask me to marry you. But
It's going to be a bit awkward in front of my wife.
it's a little bit awkward for your wife. I'm so sorry about that. what I want to... I've now forgotten my question completely. Okay. This is my question. A lot of the people that are attending this evening also want to marry you, so perhaps... a lot of the people attending this evening aren't inclined to get involved in active politics or read up all the policies or that kind of thing. And Temba, I want to invite you in here to give your input as well. My question is what do we do? How do we tell the difference? Because I think it is bad for a country if we begin to say, look at the ANC wholesale, it's wrong, get rid of it. Look at, let's say for argument's sake, because you're the leader of the opposition, the DA wholesale, it's good, we should take it. We're going to sit with the same problem where we end up just voting for a party because we believe that they liberated us from apartheid or they liberated us from the ANC, perhaps. So how, as ordinary citizens who are not necessarily always inclined to read absolutely everything, how do we begin to interrogate the substance behind a policy that the ANC perhaps presents? Because it may be that next week, Thursday, that President Ramaphosa suggests good ideas. So how do we tell the difference?
Yeah.
Temba, please give an input, and John, you as well.
Okay, I might respond tangentially to the point you're raising because there are quite a few others that I did not really quite catch. But the point is, we want to put things right in this country. But first of all, let's get people to understand what a crisis we are in, the deep crisis that confronts us all in this country. Now, let me divulge a few statistics that you will be well acquainted with. One of them is the fact that the economy is not growing. According to The Economist, we are growing this quarter at 0.01%. According to Statistics SA, we are growing at 1%, but the population growth is, over the same period, 1.2%, which means that the economic growth is negative. That's a contradiction in terms. I should actually say the economy is shrinking. That means jobs are being lost. And if you look at some recent facts that have come to the fore via the various media, you know, for example, that Massmart is closing 34 stores, and that 1,440 people are going to lose their jobs. And Massmart cites the two reasons. One of them is the blackouts, and that are euphemistically referred to as load shedding. I hate that term load shedding because it seems to have a positive connotation. For me, it's about blackouts. It's black, you can't see anything. That's what it is. And the other point that is cited by Massmart, is it is slow growth, slow economic growth. They've been very nice about this because they should have said because there is no growth. They should say there is no growth or negative growth, contradiction in terms again, but the point would be understood quite clearly. And then we've just come to learn that the village main reef, which mines gold, is in danger of collapsing, and that 7,000 jobs are on the line. I could go on and so, but I don't want to inflict too many statistics on you because somebody once said that, look, statistics are like a bikini. What they reveal is suggestive. What they hide is vital. Now the point is, when we explain policy, first of all, everything that's gone wrong in this country is a consequence of government policy. Finished and clear. There's no doubt about that. But then the thing is, what you need to emphasize when you explain to people as to what this connection is between everything that's going wrong and government policy. You have to get them to understand that good intentions are totally irrelevant in the policy arena. It is the consequences of policies, intended or especially those that are unintended. I'll cite this example, which I borrow from Professor Walter Williams in the US. Just to drive this point home, I could be coming out of this building, and a truck runs over me, and I'm dead, on the verge of dying, and the driver gets out of the truck, comes over to me, Temba, I'm sorry, I did not intend to kill you. I did not intend to run over you. But the point is, I'm as dead as if he intended to. So it's irrelevant totally as to whether he had the intention or not. But the point is, as a consequence of the truck running over my body, I am now dead. So it's very, very important for us to explain to people that when it comes to analyzing policies, we should focus on the effects. And nothing else. Now, I have this habit that when I study a proposed bill, I never look at the objectives or objects, they call them these days. I never do. That's the last thing that I look at, if I do look at it. And all I do is to study the main part of the bill, what is being proposed here, and what are the consequences going to be, and so on. But the politicians, the policymakers, don't give a damn about the consequences of policy. And for them, they know that if they come up with, say, a context for the policies or the rationale behind the policy that they are proposing, they know that many, many people just swallow that. And then they will just say, well, there are good intentions here, the government means good, and that kind of story, so on. And that's how people swallow all that nonsense. So what I would advocate is, as you go about and interacting with your neighbors, your colleagues, and other people who still look up to a nanny state that's going to sort things out for them, that they should look very carefully at the consequences, especially unintended effects of policy. And that's what I want to say. I have alluded to affirmative action policies. Let me just lay this dragon, because it accounts for a lot of our economic miseries. It upsets the racial fabric of this country. If you're a parent and you have your kids, you must be worrying about your kids' future because of affirmative action policies. Now, but the point is about affirmative action policies, empirical evidence abounds to the effect that it is counterproductive. In the United States, when they implemented affirmative action policies from 1972 onwards, full-blown affirmative action policies, you would, with blacks being the intended group, you would expect, after 50 years of such a policy, that blacks would be right up there, occupying the highest rank on the socioeconomic ladder. But alas, they are right down there, right at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder in the United States. So that in itself proves that the policy was counterproductive. Now, during the time before affirmative action policies were implemented in the US, you had a situation when black people, those in black incomes, were rising by 55%, I think, and those of whites by 31%. The whites being the highest income group, ethnic group in the United States. And so you say to yourself, what actually went wrong? What is it? And you look at the same situation where affirmative action policies were implemented in Malaysia. And there, the favored group were the indigenous Malays known as the Bumiputeras. And you would think also after about 60 years of implementation of affirmative action designed to benefit the Bumiputeras, that they would be high up there. But who is right up there now in terms of where they stand at the economic ladder? It is the Chinese Malays, and after that the Indian Malays who had been discriminated against. Like in the US, if you look at who occupies the highest economic rank in the US, you will find it is the Asiatic group, especially the Japanese Americans. And then you'll find the whites, not Hispanic, and then you'll find the Hispanics, and then you'll find the blacks right down there. Something is really serious amiss. You would think that the government in the US would say, okay, on the basis of the empirical evidence, let us scrap affirmative action in the US. But alas, they won't. They won't do that. And so, at least in South Africa, we can learn from those examples. We should ditch this policy. This is a wrong policy. We should not have any statutes, any policies that are based on racially preferential ideas. We should not have that. We do not need that. So, in short, affirmative action policies are politically unnecessary, economically irrational, and morally repugnant.
Thank you so much.
So let me just come in there, if I may. I mean, unlike Temba, I ignore the objects of the bill, I ignore the meat of the bill, and always go to see how much power they're giving the minister in terms of discretionary power, because that's always where the problems lie. But Temba's point is actually so spot on, because if you look at a bill, for instance, like the sugar tax that was recently passed by Parliament. Now, you know, everyone said, oh, well, we've got to make South Africa healthy, and we're going to put the sugar tax on to reduce the amount of sugar and soft drinks, etc., and, you know, we're going to ring fence the money and be used for health, etc. Well, I can tell you there's no ring fencing. It's driven the cost of products up. It's put people out of work, and it now imperils about 300,000 jobs. So as liberals, we've got a duty to make policy decisions based on evidence. And the evidence is there, and this is the tragedy, Temba, is that when the sugar tax was coming through Parliament, National Treasury produced a document in which they were absolutely upfront that this will cost at least 100,000 jobs, and yet it still got passed. We shouldn't be passing any laws in this country that aren't looked at through the prism of whether it's going to create jobs and what the intended as well as the unintended consequences are. Points about triple BEE, black South African households have got 10% poorer over the tenure of the triple BEE process, that you have a situation where unemployment has exploded dramatically. We have 30 million people in South Africa living in poverty, 98-point-something% of them are black South Africans. Policies have not had the intended consequences, but the other consequences have been massive job losses and a staggering drop in the quality of life going forward. So, you know, but what we're very bad at as liberals, and it comes back to your original question, so we're very good at lifting the bonnet of the car and explaining in minute detail to people how the engine works, how the carburetor feeds petrol in, and how air comes in, and how you have combustion, and how the pistons work. And we're very good at that, and we get caught in those details so much. But the average citizen out there is not interested in the engine of the car. When they get in, they want to know where they're going to, and they want to know the best way to get there.
Yes, exactly.
If we want to win the argument, we've got to stop obsessing about the engine. We've got to base our things on evidence, but we've got to own our own frames, not playing in the frames of the other political parties. We've got to own our own narrative, and we've got to be able to describe the journey we want to take South Africans to in spectacular technicolor, and we've got to set out very clearly the destination, the journey about how we're going to get people there. That's when we're going to capture the hearts and minds of people about how our policies are going to be the only policies that free people, that unleash entrepreneurship in this country, and free people from the shackles of this government that is just so intent of controlling every single aspect of their lives.
I think we've had really good answers from both of you. Temba, you required more work of us ordinary citizens to read the main body of a policy. John told us to just check where the ministers and how much power they have. To be honest, I think that as youngsters, we're probably going to take John's advice, just because apparently millennials have less attention than a goldfish at the moment. I'm reading a book by a man named John Mark Comer, and it's called The Elimination of Hurry. And what he's advocating for is for us to get to a point of actually just slowing down our lives and taking more time, resting more, and not going after this high-paced life all the time. And I think a really interesting outworking of his assessment of society is the fact that when you go onto the news, often a lot of the Western news agencies will give a reading time. So it now tells its users 30 seconds. And so we'll be like, oh, that's nice. That takes up a little more time. I can achieve more in a day. So attention is a real issue, right? A lot of attention in the media is given to SOEs, the fact that our government is failing, but also to the ANC and what's happening internally in the ANC. And if you look at broadly what's going on, the idea is that if the Ramaphosa camp wins, then South Africa is in a better state. I am assuming they mean that the individual has more freedom. But if the opposing camp, which I'm going to assume is led by David Mabuza or Ismachashule, then we're kind of in more trouble, right? I want to have a quick conversation about, is there really an ideological difference within the ANC as ordinary citizens should be concerned? And after that, we're going to go to questions. So if you guys have had any thoughts in the meantime, feel free to both make statements and give questions. We've got some time. I just want to throw that at you so that your attention is perked. But I'm going to let either of you go for it. Is there an ideological difference in the ANC?
Okay, let me respond to that one, and also in the same breath, may I ask that you allow me some latitude to bring in some other issues that I think are relevant, because I always think in terms of big picture, what is wrong there, what needs to be done, and then also maybe in the same breath, I might actually suggest as to how we should think in terms of engaging everything that is wrong in this country. Looking at the prevailing policies at the moment. Now, first of all, ideological differences within the ANC itself, outside of the tripartite alliance. For me, the way I see it, I can tell you that my emphasis would not be on ideological differences, whatever. My emphasis would be on the fact that the guy at the helm of the ANC, the president of the country, comes across as somebody who is good at just one thing only, and that is running with the hares and hunting with the hounds, which is what causes problems for us in this country. And so I can empathize with him for his own political survival, that he has to talk to one side and then the other side, appease that side, but he must forget about that because he's the president of the country. He is the president of the country. He must forget about all these ideological differences within the ANC and just simply focus on what needs to be done. That's what he needs to do. So for me, that's a basic problem that we have in this country. Now, the thing is, now we know that he's not going to repeal any of these policies that have recently been enacted because they will cause people to be angry with him. There could be all sorts of complications. But the point is, he must take a stand. If I was him, I would say, look, I am the president of the country. I will take a stand in terms of the right policies that have to be implemented. Now, in the process, I will incur the wrath of many of my comrades or colleagues, whatever they're called these days, but that's it. That has to happen. And I assure you, free market-oriented policies being implemented, there will be delivery. Within a short period of time, there would be delivery. Even if he might be ousted by that, but he could look back and actually say that I did that. And there would be this legacy that we had this president, we had these problems, these challenges to deal with, and this is what he did. Unfortunately, he's not a Mandela. And I don't think he's close to Mbeki in terms of taking a stand on some of the issues. I would like to be pleasantly surprised. I really would, but I don't think that's going to happen. But let me just sorry, I said I'm abusing the time that you're giving me.
Please, it's fine.
This affirmative action, it really, for me, is a mission. It's a personal mission. I know what it was like during the apartheid era. I was detained, I was in solitary confinement, I was tortured because of the apartheid system. And for me, for us, to have racially oriented preferential policies in this country is not on. It is not on. And so to make sure that the affirmative action concept is slain totally, I'm going to read something from Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was one of the slaves in America. If you had seen a picture of his back, you would see all those marks there when he used to be shambled from when he was a kid. He rose up to be a statesman in the US government. And Frederick Douglass, there's a book written on him. It's known as The Self-Made Man. This is what he said. Everybody has asked the question, what shall we do with the Negro? I have had but one answer from the beginning. Do nothing with us. Your doing with us has already played the mischief with us. Do nothing with us. If the apple will not remain on the tree of their own strength, if they are worm-eaten at the core, if they are early ripe and disposed to fall, let them fall. I am not for trying our fastening them on the tree in any way, except by nature's plan. And if they will not stay there, let them fall. And if the Negro cannot stand on his own legs, let him fall also. All I ask is give him a chance to stand on his own legs. Let him alone. Freed slave. This is the message that politicians should be internalizing when they look at the affirmative action, BBBE policies that are in place. But the point is, okay, what is to be done now, if I may abuse the freedom? What is to be done now? What is to be done now? Let me relate this story. This was in 1680. During the reign of King Louis XIV. Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who was the finance minister at the time, that country had a problem with production of just basic food. And he summoned a group of merchants and said to them, what should the state do in order to address this problem of inadequate production of food? The merchant said, laissez-nous faire, leave us be. In other words, leave us alone. In other words, saying, look, allow us to do our own thing in the economic arena, which means economic freedom. No, economic freedom has to be understood for what it is, objectively speaking. Economic freedom means the protection of private property, which is now under threat because of the EWC story. It also means personal choice, which comes with personal responsibility. It also means freedom to choose. Now, it could be described in that way. It also means freedom to compete. Allow people to compete amongst themselves, so long as that does not entail force or fraud. Let them do as they please. And when people are free, this is one of the things that politicians have got to understand. When people are free, their instinct is to look after themselves as they want to address their socio-economic circumstances, their challenges. And so they do their best when they know that whatever labor they put in, whatever capital they put into a business enterprise, at the end of the day, there'll be returns on that. There'll be benefits. There'll be the fruits of labor. So if you allow people to be free to do their own thing, you're going to find that we will start addressing all the basic problems that you have in this country in the shortest possible time. Leave people alone. Lee Keqiang,
I want to give John an opportunity to
Yeah.
abuse the time
Okay.
as well. I'm joking.
John, sorry. Let me just share this one with you. Let me just get to it straight away. And if I can't get to it straight away, so no, this was not him. Now, who said this? Who said this? The market is the creator of social wealth and the wellspring of self-sustaining economic development. Guess, who said that? It was Li Keqiang, the premier of China,
Wow.
communist China. With communists like this, we need capitalists.
Yeah.
I said that.
John, please abuse away.
Yeah, so I'll
Thank
abuse
you so
away
much,
now. Thanks,
Temba.
Temba, for that. And,
Very interesting.
look, it's irrelevant whether there's been an ideological battle in the ANC, because if there has been, it's been lost by Ramaphosa. And for me, the clearest indication of the fact that he has lost within the ANC was the last-minute amendment of the expropriation without compensation clause to remove the rights of people to seek arbitration in the courts and to give the powers to ministers or members of the executive to decide what land gets expropriated and at what value. And so it's irrelevant. Cyril's like the proverbial eunuch in the brothel. He's got all of the desire, but none of the ability. Wow. And that's the truth. That is the truth of the matter. So these people that in the commentary to keep saying, well, we just got to keep pushed. It's about the long game, and he's just got to. He's working very slowly, and look, there's a Zondo commission, etc. I'll tell you now, it's all a smokescreen. If people out there waiting for Cyril to deliver them to salvation, they're going to wait until the end of time, because it's not going to happen. So we've got to start prepping for a post-ANC world in South Africa, and that's why the DA's got to sort itself out, because what we need in South Africa is to build a new majority that's ready and able to step in when the ANC eventually tears itself apart. And it's coming. Every day the capturists and the rent seekers are getting stronger and stronger within that organization, and it's very clear that they're winning every single policy debate within the party. They're winning every single Congress resolution floor. So Cyril may be in office as the president, but he's not in charge. And you see it repeated so many times. He stands in Parliament and says there's 14,000 too many employees at Eskom. They need to downsize and embark upon a retrenchment. 2 days later, Ace Magashule comes up and says, no retrenchments at Eskom. Cyril tells the international market, we're going to protect the independence of the Reserve Bank. 24 hours later, Ace Magashule says something completely different. And so you're going to continue to have that paradox, and it's going to continue to cause a paralysis, because the president just doesn't have the ability to do that. So we've got to prepare ourselves for that post-ANC world, and it means that we've got to be putting on the table solutions. Now, I got called all sorts of nasty names by former friends, current friends, because I dared to suggest that we need to stop playing on the ANC's wicket and simply pointing out the ANC's failures, but put before South Africans some workable alternatives. People know why things are bad. People know why things are bad. They know who's let them down, but what they're looking for is not somebody to come, and I abuse the quote, curse the darkness, but to light a candle. And that's what we need to be doing, saying to people, look, we know things are bad where you are. We know you don't have these things, but this is what we can do for you with the right policy choices and in a language that people can understand, and you're able to, as I say, paint that destination in spectacular. And that's the area where the DA has got to be playing, not just simply this tit for tat with the president and Cyril, because frankly, they're going to become irrelevant in time. What people need is an alternative vision for South Africa that's based on the very foundational principles that Temba has spoken about: the free market, respect for the rule of law, constitutionalism, primacy of the individual, a growing market-based economy that's able to unleash the power of private capital to create jobs. Those are all the things that we should be out and setting out that clear alternative vision for South Africa. And I think if we can do that, I think we're going to be able to rally far more people to the cause and to the banner going forward, and to start building that new majority that the country's going to need desperately when that ANC trajectory eventually slips below 50%. And it's gone from up 70s, it's now sitting at 55. It's not going to get any better. It's a downward trajectory, and it's going to continue. We need to be growing to be able to whatever happens in the future, we're able to form the core of the alternative in South Africa.
I think that we've had a really interesting discussion up here. Thank you so much to both of our speakers. I want to hear what you guys think. Any questions or any inputs from the audience, please raise your hand. I'll take them. Let's do 4 at a time. Neo will move around the microphone. Over here, yeah. Okay, so Dwayne, Ryan, and then because I didn't see the people at the back, I'll take Alex and then Donna, and we'll do the next 4 people at the back. Just remember who you were, please. Dwayne, please stand, say your name, and then go for it.
Hi, thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Dwayne, member of Progress. Both of you spoke heavily about the inability of the president to come to any sort of concrete action behind what he's saying and all the rhetoric. I just want to know, in danger of being a pessimist, would it be better for us if the IMF and the World Bank does eventually come and the economy does eventually crash, and it then, in so doing, forces us to reform our policies and open up the economy and create policies based on things that work and things that are based on empirical evidence that have worked in other countries?
Cool. Thank you very much, Dwayne. Ryan, I think what we'll do is we'll listen to all 4. I'll let both of you respond to all 4, but I'm going to ask you to just be a little bit brief in the interest of time. Okay, thank you. Ryan, thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Ryan. I work for the DA, so the question's a bit biased. You can take it with a pinch of salt. One of the issues that interests me at the moment is liberalism has a bad rep around the world at the moment. And what fascinates me about South Africa in particular is that South Africans are so quick to defend the Constitution and use it as the basis of every decision that's made in the country without realizing that the South African Constitution is liberal at its core. And how do we convince the South African public that the ANC is assaulting the Constitution by removing its liberal aspect and almost decimating its whole reason for existing post-apartheid, as opposed to selling quick and very convenient ideas like land, full stop, no explanation, or free healthcare? You know, how do we make liberalism more accessible to the ordinary South African and make them understand what freedom, especially in economic terms, really means?
Thank you so much, Ryan. Alex?
Good evening. My name is Alex. I'm a grassroots member of the DA. And my question tonight is about the role of traditional leadership in South Africa. Because if you look at the studies done by people like Ruth Hall, Plaas, Classy, they show that traditional leadership in South Africa every day is assaulting the individual rights of the people who live under it, with the ANC standing by and doing nothing. But it's also a constitutionally recognized institution, and in some parts of the country they are fulfilling the role of local government where local government has failed. So what role does traditional leadership have to play in building a South Africa after the ANC?
Okay, thanks so much, Alex. Did you catch that?
No.
Was
Okay,
it a
he's
beat?
asking what? You're asking what role the institution
Traditional
should-
leadership.
Traditional leadership, yeah, I
Plays.
got that bit,
Okay,
yes.
cool. Donna, thank you so much.
What I want to know is why do we put so much emphasis on Cyril Ramaphosa? Okay, who was the deputy?
Sorry, Donna, we can't hear you. Hold the
Okay.
microphone right at your mouth.
Why do we put so much emphasis on Cyril Ramaphosa? Who was the deputy president in the Zuma years? Does that not make him an accomplice to all the looting and corruption that happened in this country?
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're talking about 100 million rands in pledges. It's a pledge. How much money has come into this country? Zippo.
Thank you for
That's
that.
very soft-spoken. You were going to explain to me.
Okay. All right, so we can over those 4, and then we'll take 4 more thereafter. John, I'll give it to you first.
Great. Thanks, Dwayne. You know, I got asked a very similar question at a far more localized level about Nelson Mandela Bay. You know, we're busy looking at whether we can put a coalition together to take control back in Nelson Mandela Bay. And one of the residents got up and said, well, surely it's better to just let the city collapse entirely and you come and pick up the pieces afterwards. And I said, look, you know, that may sound good in theory, But I think we've got a duty to step in and try and prevent harm from happening to the country and to people. I think people will suffer tremendously. By the time you get to that stage, the damage that's been done to the country is going to take even longer, I think, to get out of the death spiral that we're currently in at the moment. So I think we've got to intervene and do what we can to prevent that from happening, because you don't want people to suffer any more than they're suffering. And so I think we've got to keep fighting. Ryan, this is the thing that amazes me about... sorry, I hope there probably are some here this evening, but the really poor political commentary in this country that picks winners and losers in parties and plays the internal politics rather than giving people what they want, which is analysis. And I hear this so often. Oh, liberalism will never work in South Africa because it's a Westminster concept. And I make the point exactly that. Liberalism won, actually. And our constitution is probably one of the most liberal in the world. We won the argument. We won the debate. And it's entrenched in the constitution. And we must protect that victory with all we can, because, as you're absolutely rightly saying, that people are starting to try and roll it back. But to do so, they come up with convenient scapegoats. So we saw the scapegoat for poor land reform in South Africa, which we all know is as a result of failed policies and massive rent seeking by the political elite who have been predators in terms of land redistribution in South Africa. And yet they say the Constitution is the impediment to land reform. Now, anyone who's read Section 25 of the Constitution, who's actually had a look at it, I want to see the impediment. There's no impediment there whatsoever to land reform. In fact, it is probably the most enabling clause for land reform in South Africa. It says government not may, not should, not perhaps in the time, but it said must ensure that there are mechanisms to give people access to land. And so it's a scapegoat. And now that the scapegoat there has been pulled out, now it's the courts that are in the way of meaningful land reform in the country. And how do you solve that problem? Well, you remove people's rights to seek access to the courts to resolve those. When in fact there's never been a single case litigated in court around Section 25. And Temba Nolutshungu makes that point very clearly in his book, that there's no jurisprudence around Section 25. So you can't say the courts are the impediment to land reform. So it's all these myths, and we've got to... They're used as a distraction from the poor governance failures. So they find scapegoats, the Constitution, courts, the DA, banks, white monopoly capital. All these things are thrown out there as flares to distract people from where the real issue lies, and that is a government that is only concerned with one thing, and that's filling the pockets of whatever elite is in charge of the coffers at that particular time. The role of traditional leaders, well, I think that the role of traditional leaders should begin and end in terms of ensuring cultural and linguistic rights are protected in communities. Now, we have large parts of South Africa that operate in some form of constitutional twilight zone, as if the constitutional rights that are given to us as citizens don't apply to people there. And as a result of that compromise with national government and traditional leaders, the traditional leaders are kept very much in a style to which they like to be accustomed, but the huge suffering that exists in those communities where people still live in modern age as glorified slaves on that land without any access to agency, without any access to opportunity. And I was at NAMPO to debate land reform, and one of the stories there that brought me, and excuse me, I'm abusing my chance to talk a bit long now, so I'll get to the point. There was a young black lady, and I only use that for the purpose of illustrating the story, who got up and said, look, she's an emerging farmer in the Eastern Cape. She lives in a traditional area. It's very fertile. She started a little microgreens business where it's a very niche market, and she had done a deal with Woolworths, and they said, whatever you can supply us, we'll take. Whatever you can supply us, we'll take it. So she went off to the bank and said, well, I want to expand my operation. The bank said, no problem, you're exactly the sort of person we want to be helping, tell us where the land is, and right, what are you putting up as security? So she said, what do you mean? They said, well, what do you have as security? You said, should you own the land? She says, no, I'm on traditional land. I've got a permission to occupy it. No security of tenure. The bank can't give her money. There's someone being an entrepreneur who's been held back by a government that won't give people agency, whose very constitutional rights to own land, to have access to land, are undermined by a system that forces people into a twilight zone. We've got to bring, the Constitution applies across the land. You can't have blackout zones for constitutional rights. And we've got to make sure, because there is a role for traditional leadership, but it should be in terms of customs, in terms of language, and ensuring the integrity of those going forward. But certainly it shouldn't be supplanting elected local government, and it shouldn't be supplanting the rights of individuals that are given to them by the Constitution. The president is compromised, and the problem is with an organization that he leads, it is characterized by compromise. So every time someone's done something naughty in the ANC, everyone turns a blind eye to it and pretends it didn't happen. And what you have now is an organization where everybody in that organization knows everybody else's, and I quote my good friend Batabile, small Inyana skeletons. So, so if I want to go after Ryan comes to me and says, oh, you can come after me for the naughty thing I did, but I remember 2 years ago when you dipped into this tender, or your family got this. And you end up with this organization now that can't move against the compromised individuals in it because everybody's got the number on everybody else. And that's why it is so important as an organization that you act decisively to root out people who do not live and share your values and your principles. You need values-driven leadership in your organization. And if you leave people like that in your organization to carry on fiddling tenders, giving planning decisions, the nod, helping you, appointing friends to boards of stadium companies and the like, and you let them carry on, eventually your whole organization becomes compromised. And that's the reason why Cyril himself is compromised and he can't move. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Temba, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a point that was raised, I think, by this gentleman over there, and which I perceive as saying that we have a dilemma in terms of selling the liberalism concept. Have I captured that correctly? Yeah, in my own words, that's what I'm saying. That's how I heard you. How do you sell the concept of liberal? Pardon?
Myth.
Debugging the myth.
Yeah, the myth. For me, it still speaks to the dilemma of liberalism in terms of how you get people to understand that, doesn't it? Okay. Let me just explain. If I was you, which is the sort of modus operandi that I implemented in the past when people would ask me, Temba, how is it that you used to be a Marxist and anarchist and now you've undergone these ideological metamorphoses, you are a pro-capitalist, you're a capitalist, that kind of stuff and so on, you know. I would always say to them consistently, listen to me, when we were involved in the struggle against apartheid, what did we aspire to in terms of a post-apartheid political dispensation? We wanted to be free to decide which schools you could send your children to. You decided that we felt that we should have the right to seek employment wherever you wanted to be employed by whoever, that you could live wherever you wanted to. Now, and then I would say all those things that speak to the concept of freedom, individual liberties, and you don't want a big government that's going to tell you what you should do, where you should live, where you should work, who could employ you, that kind of thing. And all the guys would always say to me, yeah, that's right. I said, welcome, you're a liberal. Yeah, that's liberalism. You know, the concept of liberalism speaks to exactly those sentiments. They say, what do you mean? Comrade liberal, welcome, I would say, you know. Yeah, that's what it means. And so the idea is to demystify the concept of liberalism, bring it to that level where people can really comprehend what really it is about at their own micro individual level. That's very, very important. Liberalism is not a Western concept. It's not something that's been imposed on everyone. Everyone has this instinct that they want to be left alone to pursue their own socio-economic aspirations. Everyone. You can ask the guy on the street there, ask the street vendor, ask everyone. They will all answer in the affirmative that yes, 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 I want to be left alone for myself to pursue my own priorities as I see them related to the upliftment of my realization of my socio-economic aspirations. Everyone will give that very same answer uniformly. And that means those people, many people, in terms of their instinct as individuals, they are liberals. They are liberals. So I don't know if that intellectually empowers you in terms of when you go about, explaining to people as to what liberalism is about. Now this thing of white monopoly capital that John has alluded to. What I say to people whenever they come up with that nonsense, I always say to them, look, please provide me with the contact details of the head office of white monopoly capital. I want to call them for an appointment for me to tell them about the nasty things that they're doing to black people. What do you mean? I'm waiting for the contact details, please, and any names, the name of the CEO and so on. Wait, what are you saying? It's an amorphous term. It's an amorphous thing to deflect attention from the real issues in this country. Because no one can come up with that. As a matter of fact, many of the people who talk about white monopoly capital never read that book, Monopoly Capital by Barron and Sweezy. They never read that book. It's just one of those things that appeals superficially to some people who are ideologically driven, ideologically oriented. And so they talk about white monopoly capital in the same vein as they would talk about or indulge in the scapegoats such as apartheid, that's responsible for everything and for the status or state of the black people socioeconomically, and then throw in a bit of imperialism and all of that stuff and so on. These are dragons that have to be slayed. They should die. They should not be discussed. They will not lead us anywhere at all. And I'm not sure if that adequately responds to your question, but I thought that I should stick to that. However, I do agree with John here in that when it comes to traditional leadership, one has to be very, very, very careful there in terms of where they are, where they should be located in the political system. However, I tend to be compromising on the basis of, say, them being represented at the local, rural government level. And for them to be elected by the people in those villages, and for them not to play the policy, to implement any policy, but to be the watchdog at that level. Because they are very close to the people, the traditional leaders, and so they would be able to articulate and comment on, articulate sentiments that are felt at that level, and also can comment very critically on anything that they think might disrupt their own communities. But they must respect individual liberties, that everyone has their own right to vote, to engage with whoever on whatever issue. That should be respected. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Temba. So I know that I promised 4 more questions, but I'm being told at the back that the band wants to start playing, and I'm sure you've heard them practicing. So what I'm going to invite you to do is instead to please approach John and Temba afterwards, and those people that have questions are welcome to engage them. I'm not too sure how long John and Temba will still be staying with us, but please feel free to continue to have that conversation. I want to give each of you 30 seconds just to give closing remarks, and then I'll wrap up for us. John, let's start with you, and we'll end with Temba.
Yeah. I just want to say thanks to Progress and the FNF. I think these sorts of dialogues and these sorts of interactions are so important for us to be able to break the myths and shibboleths of liberalism. And just one of the other things, Ryan, is that if you read Tembeka and Gukatobi's book, some of the first liberals in South Africa were black South Africans who were fighting for franchise, etc. They were the real liberal pioneers in South Africa. And we mustn't forget that. But I think there is a lot to be positive about in South Africa, and I think if we can get the right policies in place, we can get the right people into place, that we can unlock and unleash the huge potential that this country still offers for prosperity, growth, and hope.
Yeah.
That's what I'm fighting for every day, and know it's what many of the progress people are doing, and it's what Temba is doing as well.
Yeah.
We've got to expand liberty to create prosperity.
Yeah. Thank you very much, John. Temba, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I take advantage of this by alluding to one of the issues that I did not comment on, namely
Sure,
the
go for it.
SOEs. Now, the problem with the SOEs, why they are not delivering, is that they have an inherent weakness. And that inherent weakness is the fact that you have SOEs that are owned by the government, which is amorphous, that are managed by government bureaucrats, and who are not at personal risk at all. So there is no incentive on all those from government involved in SOEs to ensure that the SOEs deliver the returns. They are inherently incapable of that. If you're not at personal risk, then you are not going to do justice in terms of the work that you're supposed to be doing. Now, if everything goes wrong, like with the SOEs that ought to have disappeared a long time ago, it does not affect you. You ride into the sunset with your money bags and your fringe benefits intact. Nothing happens to you. In the private sector, the rules of the game are totally different. That is why the best thing to be done with the SOEs is to sell them off or give them over to the private sector. When I was in Prague in 1991, and I had occasion, as being part of an audience, being addressed by Václav Klaus. Václav Klaus, the prime minister at the time, and Václav Havel, the president. Do you know what they did then? No. The two things that they did, they're lessons for South Africans here. Two things they did was, they said, now we are awaking from this communist slumber. We want all the industrialists from all over the world to come and tell us what policies we need to put in place so that they don't invest in their own country, but invest in Czechoslovakia, as it was known at the time. Fantastic. And one of the things that they also did was to give away privatization vouchers to every single person in that country. Right. That's the story behind the economic success of that country.
Thank you so much, Temba. And then, in closing, I want each of you to take note of the fact that there are at least 70 people in this room right here. And so when we see people standing up and protesting on campuses or standing for ideals which we don't necessarily agree with, the idea of the silent majority doesn't exist, right? We are that silent majority that are willing and are keen to come through for rational and calm discussion. So as Progress SA, we don't only hold things like this on the first Thursday and the next one will be in 2 months' time, but we run campaigns on campuses and we run campaigns which we hope for to cross the country. Because ideas like we need to make sure that in a university space you can pursue your ideas whether you are white or black or Muslim or Christian, doesn't matter. Academic freedom is incredibly important to us. And we'll continue to punt each of those ideas. We have a banner here, and John is sitting in front of it, but at the bottom it says, if you want to join the fight, we realize that not everyone wants to sit up here or organize an event like this or campaign or join a party or join an NGO, but you can contribute in one way or another. And so we are fundraising. We're fundraising to make sure that we can continue the fight for academic freedom, no matter where you are in the country. We're fundraising to make sure that we can build capacity internally, that we can have more of these events, because really to organize them is quite a tall order and you need a team. And so my request to you is that if you're not going to get actively involved in politics or fight for the country or shape the country, please join the fight by donating to Progress. We have ourselves a SnapScan barcode. And on that note, thank you very much for joining us. The band's going to start probably any moment. If there's any leftover food, feel free, but also if you have any more tokens in this bar tab, please go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you so